Three words, just three simple words, changed the course of World War II. Who spoke them? It wasn't a general, it wasn't a spy, it was a saint. A man who discovered how to penetrate the psyche of the world's most dangerous man, using only invisible waves cutting through the darkness. You're about to uncover the most extraordinary story never told in history books. A story about how the most advanced technology of its time became a spiritual weapon in the hands of someone Hitler completely underestimated. But before I reveal those three words that kept the Führer awake for weeks, you need to understand who Maximilian Kolbe was and why he was the last person Hitler ever imagined could dismantle his propaganda machine. Poland, 1941. As Nazi tanks crushed everything in their path, a slight man with glasses worked silently in his monastery. His hands held no weapons. They held wires, valves, and electronic components he built himself. Kolbe wasn't just a saint, he was a brilliant engineer who had transformed his convent into something no Nazi officer could ever imagine, the first clandestine religious radio station in occupied Europe. But here's what will shock you. Kolbe didn't use his radio to broadcast prayers. He discovered something the Reich's best psychologists would take years to understand: how three right words, at the right moment, could break any mental code. Imagine invisible waves cutting through the darkness of night, penetrating fortified bunkers, reaching the ears of German soldiers who began to question everything they believed. Kolbe had discovered the precise frequency of human doubt. Have you ever felt that moment when a single phrase completely changes your perspective on something? When simple words reveal a truth that was always there, but you never saw it? Kolbe turned this experience into a science. While Hitler invested millions in visual propaganda, giant posters, and theatrical speeches, a saint discovered that the human mind had a back door, a secret entrance that could only be accessed through what he called the frequency of the soul. But how on earth did a Polish Franciscan friar discover this? The answer will astound you. Kolbe studied electrical engineering in Rome years before the war. He had perceived something that escaped the greatest scientists of the time. Radio waves didn't just carry sound, they carried intention, emotion, pure truth. And he proved it in a way that sent the Nazi high command into a panic. In September 1941, Kolbe achieved the impossible. He hacked the official German radio frequency for exactly 3 minutes. 3 minutes that changed everything. 3 minutes during which he transmitted only three words. But these weren't just any three words. They were three words he had discovered to be the perfect combination to break any mental conditioning. Words that worked like a cognitive virus, spreading from mind to mind, faster than any Nazi propaganda. What happened in the following 48 hours is something the Nazi archives tried to hide for decades. German soldiers began to desert in alarming numbers, not out of fear, not out of hunger, but because three simple words had reactivated something they thought they had lost forever. Kolbe discovered how to reconnect the human conscience using technology. He found the exact frequency of compassion and used it as a weapon against the most brutal regime in history. But here's where the story becomes truly breathtakingly beautiful. Kolbe knew his discovery would cost him his life. He knew Hitler would do anything to silence him. And yet, he continued broadcasting. Night after night, invisible waves cutting through the darkness, bringing hope to places where hope had been forbidden. The Nazis discovered his location after weeks of investigation. When they raided the monastery, they found something that left them perplexed: a technology laboratory more advanced than many German military installations. Kolbe had built everything himself. Makeshift antennas that picked up signals from all over Europe. Amplifiers he designed himself to maximize range. And an encryption system that Nazi cryptographers never managed to crack. But the most impressive thing, when they arrested him, Kolbe was smiling, as if he knew something they didn't. As if those 3 words had already done their work, and they had. Because what Hitler didn't understand is that Kolbe wasn't just transmitting words. He was transmitting something far more powerful, the frequency of lost humanity. And once you hear that frequency, it never leaves your mind. Pause, take a deep breath, feel the weight of what you've just discovered. Comment with 1 word, just one, that defines what's going through your mind right now. Because what comes next will connect all the dots in a way you never imagined. Auschwitz, 1942. Kolbe is imprisoned, but his true mission has only just begun, because those who heard his transmissions can't forget. The 3 words spread like invisible waves across occupied Europe. German soldiers whisper among themselves. Officers begin to question orders. The resistance gains strength not through weapons, but through a truth that cannot be killed. Hitler ordered investigations into psychological interference in troops. Nazi scientists desperately tried to discover how Kolbe managed to infect German minds so efficiently. They knew something was happening, but they couldn't understand what. What they didn't know is that Kolbe had discovered something that transcended technology, something that connected science and spirituality in a way that the rational mind cannot fully process. The 3 words weren't just sound, they were a key that opened a door in the human soul that not even the most efficient Nazi brainwashing could close. And now, in that concentration camp, surrounded by death and despair, Kolbe was about to use that key one last time, in a way that would definitively prove that certain truths are more powerful than any military force. But before I reveal what happened in those final days, you need to understand how the 3 words Kolbe transmitted were connected to a discovery that would forever change our understanding of the power of human communication. A discovery that Hitler tried to steal, but never managed to comprehend. A discovery that today, decades later, is still being studied in silence by intelligence agencies around the world. The 3 words were these: you are loved. It seems too simple to have brought down the Nazi war machine, doesn't it? But here's what Kolbe discovered that no military psychologist of the time understood. Those 3 words, transmitted at the exact frequency, at the exact moment of vulnerability, acted like a complete cognitive reset. Imagine German soldiers, exhausted, afraid, far from home, listening to a voice that cut through all the propaganda, a voice that didn't condemn them, didn't judge them, only reminded them of something they had forgotten, that they were human, that they were loved, that there was another truth beyond the hatred that fueled them. Kolbe had discovered the frequency of human vulnerability, and "you are loved" was the key that unlocked that locked door in anyone's heart, no matter how conditioned they were. But I'm going to tell you something that will chill you to the bone. Kolbe didn't choose those words randomly. He had spent years studying the patterns of Nazi brainwashing. He had decoded exactly how Hitler destroyed human individuality, and he created the perfect antidote. Hitler built soldiers through the denial of individual worth. You are nothing. The Reich is everything. Kolbe attacked the very core of this programming with the opposite truth. You are loved. You have value. You matter. And it worked in a way that left the Nazi high command desperate. German military reports from October 1941 describe something they called emotional desertion syndrome. Soldiers who simply stopped fighting. They didn't flee. They didn't rebel. They just stopped, as if something inside them had been reconnected. SS officers interrogated dozens of these soldiers. All described the same thing, a voice on the radio that made them remember who they were before the war, a voice that made them question not their orders, but their own lost humanity. And this is where the story gets really diabolical. Hitler became obsessed with discovering how Kolbe had managed this. He ordered his best scientists to study the phenomenon. He wanted to turn that discovery into a weapon for the Reich. But there was a problem. A discovery the Nazis made that terrorized them. Kolbe's words only worked when transmitted with genuine intention. When they tried to replicate it using German actors saying, "Sie sind geliebt," you are loved, the effect was zero. Why? Because Kolbe had discovered something that transcended technology. The radio waves carried more than sound. They carried the intention of the speaker's heart, and Kolbe's intention was pure. It was real. It was genuine love for people he had never met. Hitler tried for months to reverse engineer the process. He brought in the Reich's best psychologists. He invested fortunes in research. He tried to create a Nazi word weapon. All experiments failed. What he didn't understand is that certain truths cannot be falsified. Certain frequencies can only be accessed through absolute sincerity. And sincerity was something the Nazi regime had completely lost. Meanwhile, in Auschwitz, Kolbe continued his mission in a way that will leave you breathless. Without a radio, without technology, he discovered that invisible waves didn't need equipment to travel. They only needed courage. July 1941. A man is about to be executed for attempting to escape. The Nazi rule was clear. If someone escaped, 10 random prisoners would die in his place. The guards chose 10 men. One of them was a family man, begging for his life. And then Kolbe did something that broke all the rules of the concentration camp. Something that proved that his 3 words weren't just a radio technique. They were a way of life. He volunteered to die in that man's place. But here's what the Nazi guards didn't expect. In the 17 days Kolbe spent in the death cell, something extraordinary happened. He began to transmit again, not through radio waves, through something far more powerful. Other prisoners began to hear a voice coming from the underground cell, a voice that sang, a voice that prayed, a voice that whispered through the concrete walls, "You are loved." SS guards reported anomalous behavior among the prisoners, an unusual calm, an inexplicable strength, as if Kolbe's words were spreading through the walls, infecting the entire camp with something they couldn't stop. The Nazis tried to silence him. They forbade any sound coming from the cell. But the invisible waves were already cutting through the darkness again, not through technology, through something no military force can control, the power of a soul that found its true frequency. And here's where the story takes a turn that will change everything you thought until now, because Kolbe did not die in vain. His 3 words, spread across occupied Europe, had planted seeds that would grow beyond anything Hitler could imagine. At that very moment, in secret bunkers across Europe, resistance engineers were decoding Kolbe's transmissions, discovering not only what he said, but how he said it, learning to replicate that frequency of the soul on a scale that would change the course of the war. But before I reveal how the 3 words of a saint became the secret weapon that Hitler never managed to neutralize, you need to understand that this story is only just beginning. Because what Kolbe discovered about the power of the right words at the right frequency with the right intention didn't die with him. It evolved, it multiplied, and today, 80 years later, it's still being used in ways he could never have imagined. I'm going to tell you something that will chill you to the bone. In the secret archives of the French resistance, discovered only in 1995, there's a document classified as Project Kolbe, a project that transformed the 3 words of a saint into a subterranean communication network that covered all of occupied Europe. Resistance engineers had recorded Kolbe's original transmissions. Not just the words, but something much more subtle. The exact pattern of his breathing, the frequency of his voice, even the moments of silence between words. They discovered that Kolbe had accidentally stumbled upon something that science would take decades to understand. What did they discover? That "you are loved" wasn't just a phrase. It was a specific neurological frequency that, when replicated exactly, activated what we now know as a deep connection response in the human brain. A response that is stronger than any propaganda, more powerful than any threat. And this is where the story becomes almost science fiction. The resistance began training operators to transmit not just Kolbe's words, but their exact emotional frequency. They created a network of human transmitters, spreading that frequency of the soul across Europe. German soldiers in Paris started deserting after seemingly casual conversations with local French people. Nazi officers in Warsaw reported disturbing dreams. After hearing certain phrases whispered in the streets, Kolbe's discovery had gone viral, spreading from person to person, faster than any technology of the time. Hitler grew paranoid. He knew something was happening, but couldn't pinpoint what. He ordered investigations into mass psychological contamination, creating entire departments dedicated to discovering how the resistance was infecting his troops. But it was too late. Kolbe's invisible waves had cut through the darkness, irrevocably, not through radio, but through something far more powerful, the human capacity to transmit truth through genuine connection. And then, in 1943, something extraordinary happened, an event that proved Kolbe had discovered not just a communication technique, but a fundamental law of human nature. A group of German soldiers in a small town in Belgium refused to carry out an extermination order. When interrogated, they all described the same thing. They had heard an inner voice saying, "You are loved," a voice that made them remember who they were before the war. The officer in charge of the interrogation wrote in his report a sentence that still sends chills down my spine. "It's as if the dead priest is still transmitting. It's as if his words have become immortal." Maki didn't know how right he was, because here's the truth that will connect everything for you. Kolbe didn't just discover how to penetrate psyches through words. He discovered how to make words immortal, how to make certain truths replicate themselves, passing from person to person, generation to generation. And that brings us to today, to you, listening to this story. Have you ever stopped to think why certain words have the power to change your life instantly? Why some phrases are etched in your memory forever, while others you forget in seconds? Kolbe discovered the answer. He discovered that there are words that vibrate at the exact frequency of the human soul. Words that, when spoken with genuine intention, cut through all defenses, all conditioning, all mental barriers. "You are loved" is one of those words. But it's not the only one. Today, 80 years later, psychologists study what they call high-frequency words. Neuroscientists research the Kolbe effect, the ability of certain phrases to trigger instantaneous neurological changes. Therapists use techniques based on his discovery to heal traumas that have resisted years of treatment. But here's what strikes me most. Kolbe's discovery didn't need advanced technology. It didn't need sophisticated laboratories. It only needed a soul that found its true frequency and had the courage to transmit. And that's the most powerful lesson of this story. It's not about radio. It's not about war. It's about the power each of us has to transmit invisible waves that can cut through any darkness. Every time you choose to say, "You are loved," to someone who needs to hear it. Every time you transmit truth instead of judgment. Every time you decide to use your words to build instead of destroy, you are continuing Kolbe's transmission. You are proving that certain frequencies are more powerful than any military force, any propaganda machine, any attempt at dehumanization. Kolbe transformed 3 simple words into a weapon that defeated the most brutal regime in history. Not through violence, through something Hitler never understood, the infinite power of truth transmitted with love. And you know what the most beautiful part of this story is? It's not over. It will never be over. Because every time someone hears those 3 words and decides to pass them on, the invisible waves continue cutting through the darkness. Kolbe's transmission continues, The frequency of the soul continues to spread. You have just become part of that transmission. You have just discovered that you have the power to hack hearts, to reconnect consciousnesses, to remind people of who they truly are. The 3 words that changed the course of World War II are now in your mind. The frequency that defeated Hitler is now in your soul. The question is, what are you going to do with that power? Because in a world full of invisible waves of hate, of fear, of separation, maybe it's time for you to start your own transmission. Maybe it's time for you to remind someone today of a truth that can change everything. You are loved, and now you know the power those words carry. Use them wisely. Transmit them with courage, because Kolbe's story proves that sometimes the smallest invisible waves are the ones that cause the greatest transformations. And maybe, just maybe, 80 years in the future, someone will tell the story of how you used 3 simple words to hack a heart that needed to be reminded of its own humanity. The invisible waves continue cutting through the darkness. The transmission never stops. And now, it continues through you.